Hi, welcome. I'm Coach Les, and you are now tuned in to the Danaya Azure Radio Show.
Hello, Coach Les. How are you?
Better than phenomenal. Thanks for asking.
I love it. So I met Coach Les on Clubhouse in the 413 room. Shout out to Steve Malcheski and all the amazing things he's doing over there. So how did you initially get connected to Clubhouse?
So there's a gentleman out there named Edwin Edibiri, and he is the founder of the Happy Neighborhood Project. Back in 2016, he interviewed 1,000 people about happiness. And I met him through somebody here in Minneapolis introduced me to the Happy Neighborhood Project. And I went on the Happy Neighborhood Project back in December of 2020. And in January, I got to meet Edwin, and he said, "Hey, you should come and check this out." And he invited me January 31st, and I followed the link, and I went, "Oh, another social media app." And I literally ran away as fast as I could. I opened it up, and looked at it and then ran away. So when you join Clubhouse, you get that little party popper. Well, my party popper came and went. And what brought me to Clubhouse then was on February 12th, 2021. It was a Friday. I found out that I was not going to be able to go. The pandemic had stopped us from going on our second year of missions trip to Haiti. And I was so bummed. And I just happened to click on Clubhouse, and I went, you know what? I think I can turn this into a place where I can create a mission and a ministry for myself. And lo and behold, I created the 24-hour Bible study club, which is now a house. Mm-hmm. And I've been operating that 7 days a week, multiple up to 25 rooms a week for 2 years. And what's that? March, April, May, June, and 5 months.
Wow, that's awesome. So how did you get connected with the 413?
So part of my journey on Clubhouse was I visited a lot of the rooms. And back when I first started, there were some pretty powerful rooms going on. There was the $1 million, what it takes to run $1 million business. With Dan and Kate, and I spent a lot of time in their room, and I was invited to become a moderator. And in that role of becoming moderator, I learned a lot over a short period of time. I went into other rooms where I became known as Coach Les, and people knew that if they brought me up on stage, I had high decorum, high integrity, and my thing was all about integrity. And I bumped into Steve Michalski, and at one point he invited me to the 413, and I'm like, "Are you kidding? I got to get up an extra hour early."
Look,
I'm already up at 6:30 doing my thing, and so I think he and I met and we talked, and I just kind of shook my head, going, "I don't need another thing to do on my plate, especially on Clubhouse." And then about 9 months ago, not quite a year, I suddenly, said, "You know what? Let me go listen to this," because I happened to be awake. And I started to see the value of it as a place to empower me and get me excited and lifted up before my show started at 6:30. So I had basically 50 minutes to enjoy the 413 and get myself into a place of being prepared for the 24-hour Bible study morning possibility with a cup of Bible. And I went in, and it was great because it was non-religious, non-political, and it was just uplifting. And then Stephen and I just, in learning about who I was and where my background was, we became friends. And then in February of this year, my wife and I flew to LA to stay with somebody I'd met on Clubhouse, Steve Appel. And while we were there, Steve Michalski said, let's meet. So we met at his meeting spot, the Starbucks. And got to know him and just fast became friends. You know, he has quite a bit of faith in his background. That's just to put it mildly. And we became fast friends. And, you know, I usually talk to him several times a week, and I'm in the room every day.
I love it. I love it. And integrity coach Les Hill is my guest here on Danaya Azure Radio. So how do you become an integrity coach? How does that happen?
Well, so I invented the category. There's an integrity coach website where the guy calls himself, he actually is a business coach. And I thought, well, you know, I can't pull away that website from him, which is fine. And I'm unique in creating integrity coach as a category for coaching, much like, you know, people have specialty coaches for the different arenas. I really went to work on, you know, everybody says, so who do you coach? And, you know, I'm like, hey, I came from the personal training and development world. I coach anybody from 8 years old to 85, from a dishwasher to a CEO. And I thought, you know what? You know, I've been coaching for over 23 years. How can I narrow it down and be able to narrow down what it is that I do and what it is that I work with people? And I created that integrity coach. And it scares some people, which is okay. It excites people because they're interested in, you know, leveling up their integrity across their entire company and across everything that they're doing. And it allows me to go into and dig into those areas of life that some people get a little shaky about. Their family, their faith, whatever it is, and see how all of those, both of those two impact their business, and distinguishing the integrity with which they approach life. And in doing that, what I noticed was if somebody was having a tough time in a certain area of their business and they were stuck, I could go to their family or I could go to their faith and look for an area where they were out of integrity, have less blocks, cause a breakthrough, and then bring it over to their business and demonstrate to them how the two were front of the hand and back of the hand. And the next thing you know, I've got this new leverage called being an integrity coach, making a difference with people with outside the box thinking. And there's no defense mechanism that's yet been created.
Right, exactly. Definitely. So before you were coaching, you were also into wine. So how did you get into that business?
Mm-hmm. So I have the privilege of my parents. I grew up in England, was born and raised in England. My father was Scottish, my mother's English. They were both divorced and remarried by the time I was 8. And my stepmother and my father moved to Belgium, lived in Belgium, Brussels, Belgium for a year, then moved to France. And I went to live with my father and stepmother in France. And food, my dad worked for a big corporation, a US corporation in France that paid the bills. They paid for the home. They paid for going out to eat. Had a lot of perks, a lot of benefits. And so I became very familiar with food. And I grew up in a European environment where at the table, I remember having my first sip of wine, didn't really like it at like 5 years old. But then as I grew up, I learned how to taste wine with food. And that became my thing. And then as I went up through college. I went into the restaurant business as a waiter, a server, a bartender, a cook, a busser, a room service person, a caterer, and did all of those things and looked for something that would combine my skills from the day and night. And I got into the selling wine and liquor business. And then once I got into the wine and liquor business, I fell in love with wine. I became a certified sommelier, which I absolutely love. And my passion became doing events. And people still call me today, hey, Les, would you come and do a wine and food pairing for us? We want to spend this much money. We want to, and they give me a budget, and I go buy wine and I go buy cheese, and they'll cook some food, and I come and I do an in-house wine tasting. And it's not like a huge moneymaker. It's more being paid to do something I absolutely love. So I still do them. And from there, I did that business for 23 years. And I still have a couple of clients that own restaurants now. So I get to keep my, little pinky in the business. And I've enjoyed, I've been blessed. I've been to Napa and Sonoma. I went to school in Bordeaux for a short time and learned about Bordeaux wines. I've toured all over France because we lived there, but I've also toured over there as an adult and been to many of the wine locations and wine regions. I was the Bordeaux importer for the wine company that I worked at for 5 years. And, I'm a geek. So that's a little bit. And I went from being a wine salesperson to a coach because I started working with a personal training and development company in the evening. I'm a workaholic. And I worked for that personal training and development company for 10 years, put in about 20,000 hours of training over the 10 years. And, fell in love with making a difference with people, and then combined my knowledge of sales and the business aspect from the restaurant, liquor, and wine world into the personal training and development and coaching and that aspect of empowerment, and found myself as a business coach. And here I am.
That's awesome. So what would you say has been one of your most memorable experiences traveling in the wine business?
By far the time that I went to Bordeaux. If you remember, I think it was 2008 or 2009, whenever that crash was.
2008.
At 2008. And everybody, there was such a mess. And I was scheduled the following spring to go to Bordeaux for training and wine school. And so there were supposed to be 16 of us from around the country. 15 of them canceled. I showed up. I was the only person. So for this almost 2 weeks, I lived in a chateau. I stayed in the room that President Nixon stayed in. The fun thing about it was one of those showers where it has 12 heads. I slept in a bed that had these beautiful French doors that opened up looking at the vineyards. And I woke up, had a personal chef cooking my breakfast. I mean, except it was really lonely because the table's designed for like 20 some people. And here's me. So I ended up by the second and third day, I ended up grabbing my food and sitting in the kitchen at the counter, chatting with the chef. I had my own chauffeur who drove me around to the different appointments, and I had my own instructor. And I had so much fun with the chef because I also, speaking French, that the chef canceled the chauffeur for 2 days, and the chef drove me around. And, it's one thing to have the red carpet treatment because I'm a supplier, but it's another thing to have the backdoor red carpet treatment because everybody wanted to know the chef from Barton et Goustier Chateau Magnol. And so we went in, and I got to taste. I mean, I tasted wines that are, collectors would pay. People that have, ungodly amounts of money would spend 5 or 6 figures to buy a bottle, and I got to taste some of that with some of the people that knew guests were coming. We went around dinner time, and they had special people coming in, and the chef and I got to taste. And I don't need to drink a massive glass, right? So we got to taste little bits of it and just drool over this, Chateau Pétrus, Chateau Hosanna, Chateau Aubryon, Chateau Margaux, Chateau Lafite Rothschild. I mean, yeah, I was sincerely spoiled.
I love it. That's so awesome. An integrity coach. Les Hill is my guest here on Danaya Azure Radio. So you initially were kind of skeptical about Clubhouse, and now you have over 11,000 followers. What would you say has been your biggest challenge when it comes to growing your platform on Clubhouse?
I would say the biggest challenge is, I think there's so much that's assigned to how big you are, right? How many followers you have. If you have a club, how many people are in the club? Well, now it's called a house. If you have a house, how many people are in the house? And when I joined, there were big houses and lots of big people. Like people, Grant Cardone's on there, and he's got 685,000 people following him, and the owners have 6 million following them. And what I noticed was when people got over 10,000 followers, there was a listening that was given to them, like, ooh, we want to hear what this person has to say. You become a little bit more credible. And so it was a challenge and a race to get to that credibility point. And at one point, I was up to 14,000, and I was like, oh, things are going great. I'd been in lots of rooms. I would go in and listen in rooms, and they'd say, oh, go into this room and listen in this room and, share. And so I'd visit lots of rooms. I was absolutely crazy. I spent, probably 80 hours a week sometimes in Clubhouse. And, this as an active person. And then they came in and they did a clean sweep. In other words, they came in and they figured out there were lots of trolls. There were lots of people that were stacking their numbers and followers. And I went, why would people do that? And, people were paying for it. So Clubhouse came in and took them out of the system. They came in and did a clean sweep. One day I was at 14,000. The next day I came in, I was at 4,500. And I literally cried because I was like, are you kidding me? And I found out that some of the rooms that I'd gone into, when you go into those rooms, they call them trolls, were put onto you. So I'd be all excited. Wow, 400 people connected with me last night. That's awesome. Right? I didn't know any better.
Right.
And so that was a big setback. And now, as soon as that happened, I'm like, why is this such a big deal? It's all, and it occurred to me, it was all about ego. And I think there was a turning point for me that said, I can make a difference. People know me. They know my bio profile picture because I've kept it the same. And it's time for me just to own who I am. And I think that's the biggest breakdown and breakthrough I've had on Clubhouse, was to be able to do that.
Definitely. I think, and it's interesting that you talked about, the numbers game. Social media is a numbers game. However, I am all about quality over quantity. Because if you don't have the engagement, if you don't have more followers, if you're buying your followers, then when it's time for you to actually put something out and, promote something, you get crickets.
And it's difficult anyway, even when you have legitimate followers, because a lot of them aren't on at the same time, right? And you open up a room, and I mean, I've been opening up rooms now. I've done thousands of rooms on Clubhouse over the last two and a half years. And I open up a room and I still, a lot of times, don't break 100 in the room. Mm-hmm. And I know that it's because a lot of it's faith-based. But even when my biggest room was, I'm also a Zig Ziglar coach, and I have the Ziglar Legacy Club, or Ziglar Legacy House, excuse me. And I did quite a bit of work last year in that club, which it was a club back then. And one time I had a room on a Friday night, and the word got out that I was doing live coaching. Mm. And we had over 250 people in the room.
Nice.
And I was coaching somebody who was a coach on Clubhouse. And they gave me permission to basically use a scalpel, and I used a scalpel. They still are talking to me, believe it or not. But they have not been into any of my rooms since then. So there's definitely gossip that flows through Clubhouse. I think drama is one of the things that drives a lot of these big rooms to get big. There's a lot of negativity. I mean, 413 is one of the, half dozen rooms on Clubhouse that is not negative. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, hopefully that gave you way more than you asked.
No, definitely, for sure. So, you talked about the different coaches. So, what would you say is one of the biggest challenges for people who are just starting out when it comes to coaching?
Listening. Learning how to listen and allowing people, clients, future clients, referral partners, people that as they get to know you can then refer you out to people that they bump into. Being such a good listener that people know, love, and trust you based on the fact how you listen and how you recreate them.
Absolutely. You said something very important, when you talked about your experience when you went to France and you were the 1 out of 15 people that were there. That shows the importance of showing up. I say it all the time. You never know who's going to be in the room. You never know where your next opportunity is going to come from. This is why it's important to show up, because you will stand out that way. Because I guarantee you, when you left, that everybody was talking about you and talking about the chef, all that, because you were the one that came out, as opposed to people that decided not to for whatever reason, and you become a reliable person, which is why it's very fitting that you're an integrity coach, because you show that in what you've done.
Yeah. I think my famous sales story is I called on, so you know who Prince is, of course, right?
Of course.
So his bodyguard, everybody thought it was Prince's club, but his bodyguard opened a club here in Minneapolis called Glam Slam. And a very good friend of mine who was a bar manager that was buying from me at a club that was another club, got hired as their bar manager. And I was like, yes, it's one of the biggest bars in the city. I'm going to get the business. And he says, Les, I'm going to give you the business because I know how well you take care of me. And I called on him and saw him in person twice a week for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And in the second year, it was a Friday night at 4:00, and he called me and said, Les, I need 10 cases of vodka for tonight. I didn't get my vodka order from our rep, and he's not answering his phone. And I said, I'll have it there in 45 minutes. And just so you know, the warehouse is closed at 4. So I had to, it was my relationship, and I borrowed it from one of my local liquor stores. And I delivered it. And the owner saw me coming in with the cases of vodka. And he says, who are you? What are you doing? And I said, you needed 10 cases of vodka. And I'm the only person that answered my phone. And I ended up with half of the business.
That's
after 2 years and 104 visits.
Exactly. It's about being patient and showing up and showing out. I love it. And integrity coach Les Hill is my guest here on Danaya Azure Radio. So what advice can you give someone who is just starting to open up rooms on Clubhouse?
So one of the things that I've recommended for people is to find somebody that already has a house that has quite a few followers. Get to know them, work with them, learn from them, and then ask them if you can open a room in their house. And what I mean by that is, of course, if you're coming into the 24-hour Bible study, it's got to have at least something towards faith, right?
Of course, that makes sense.
And yeah, right. You don't want to come in there and start talking about mechanics. The cool thing about it, though, is when you do that, you have the ability to then use their audience, their members, to speak out to when you open a room. There's so many people that come on Clubhouse because they've heard about Clubhouse and how great it is. They come in and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna knock them dead, right? They come on and they open them up, they fill their bio profile, and they start a club, they start a house, and they open up a room, and there's 2 people in it, their newest friend and themselves. And once again, it's all about ego, right? It's, find a community to become a part of and grow who you are. Have people get to know who you are and how you are. And from that space, then you can open up a room. And what I always tell people is like, look, don't then suddenly get all these followers, go open your own house and leave that house. No, open up your own house and keep both and start yours and maintain that room with that person that you create a relationship with.
Yes.
Because now you've got the sum of both. And the people that may never have gone in here but come to yours, you can now bring them over and help the house. So it becomes a community affair. And for me, community is everything.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for coming on. Make sure you go ahead and tell everybody where they can find you, follow you, and book you.
Well, you'll see right below me here, you can go to leshill.info. leshill.info. That's the website. Put the WWs in there. You can also find me at Less is More Coaching, because that's the name of my company, an LLC. And when you go to my website, you'll see the ability to book a calendar appointment with me. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Pinterest. You can find me on Tumblr. You can find me on Clubhouse, of course. where I spend a lot of time. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And I know there's a lot of people that are always curious, how do I vet somebody? And I think that LinkedIn it really makes that possible, because when you go on LinkedIn and you find somebody and you connect with them, you can see who their mutual followers are. And you can actually go back and look and see the testimonials that have been left, the way people have interacted with them, the events, how they have helped other people move forward by sharing stuff and reposting stuff. For me, LinkedIn is what I call the Facebook of business people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Danaya. I really appreciate it. And for those of you that have not had an opportunity to actually meet and spend time with Danaya, both Danaya and Seba do some absolutely amazing things to support the arts. And that's really where I found my passion for getting to know Danaya. So Danaya, thank you for both what you and First Lady do as far as supporting the arts around the country and making a profound difference with them. And just really, your heart is massive, and the impact that you have is, inexplicable. So thank you.
Thank you so very much. Have an amazing day.
You too, Danaya. Take care.